On a radiant spring morning in April 2025, Buckingham Palace stood as a monument to Britain's enduring legacy. Its ivory walls, glowing under a sky of soft blue. The air was fresh, kissed by a gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming tulips from the palace gardens, and the faint hum of London's awakening black cabs honking, bicycles whirring, the distant chime of Big Ben marking 10 o'clock. The marble-paved courtyard buzzed with life, a kaleidoscope of tourists from every corner of the globe. Japanese families snapping photos, American students sketching the palace's arches, Italian couples reading guidebooks under fluttering Union Jacks. The click of cameras, the laughter of children, and the murmur of multilingual chatter wove a vibrant tapestry. Yet the scene was anchored by a figure of unyielding stillness, a royal guard, a living emblem of tradition. Corporal Thomas Reed, a 29-year-old member of the Queen's Guard, stood at his post before the palace gates, his scarlet tunic pristine, his bearskin hat a towering crown of duty. His face, tanned from years of outdoor drills, was a mask of discipline, his brown eyes fixed on a point beyond the horizon. Thomas had grown up in a small Devon village, the son of a school teacher and a fisherman. Raised on tales of his great-uncle, a D-Day veteran, he had joined the army at 90, drawn to the Guard's blend of history and honor. His training, grueling marches, sleepless nights, the weight of ceremonial perfection had forged him into a man who could stand motionless for hours, ignoring heat, cold, or mockery. To the tourists, he was a spectacle, a living statue. To himself, he was a steward of Britain's soul. The courtyard was a microcosm of the world. A family from Manchester, their accents warm, shared a thermos of tea, their children chasing pigeons across the marble. A German professor, his glasses fogged, lectured his students on the palace's Georgian design. A retired nurse from Cardiff, her husband at her side, watched Thomas with quiet pride, remembering her father's stories of the Blitz. A young journalist from the Times, stationed for a feature on tourism, sipped coffee, her notebook open to capture the morning's rhythm. Among the crowd was Sophie Laurent, a 34-year-old French marketing executive, her yellow sundress a splash of color against the gray marble. Sophie, on holiday from Paris, carried a designer handbag and a restless energy, her phone always raised to capture the next Instagram story. She saw the palace as a backdrop, the guards as props, her visit a chance to boost her followers. The breeze stirred the flags above, their gentle flapping a counterpoint to the crowd's hum. Tourists posed beside Thomas, their smiles wide, their voices respectful but curious. Does he ever move? A Manchester boy asked his father, who chuckled. Not unless the king says so. The German students, their pencils scratching, debated the guard's endurance. The Cardiff nurse, her husband nodding, whispered, "It's more than a job. It's a calling." Sophie, weaving through the crowd, filmed a selfie video, her voice bright. "Bonjour, London. Look at this place fit for a queen." She panned to Thomas, her lens lingering. "And check out the toy soldier. Bet he's dying to blink." Her laugh, sharp and carefree, cut through the courtyard's decorum, drawing glances from the Manchester family, who frowned, and the journalist, who scribbled, "Tourist test palace etiquette." Thomas, his eyes unmoving, heard Sophie's words, felt the weight of her gaze. His training was a fortress, his mind a steel trap. He had endured worse drunken stag parties, jeering teenagers, the ache of standing in winter rain. Yet Sophie's tone, her casual dismissal of his role, stirred a flicker of irritation, quickly buried. He was not here for applause, but for duty to the crown, to history, to the millions who saw the guard as Britain's heartbeat. The crowd shifted, their chatter resuming, but Sophie lingered, her phone still raised, her voice growing bolder. "Comment, Boubeson," she teased, using a Vietnamese phrase she'd picked up on a work trip, her accent mocking. "Give us a smile for the gram." The Manchester mother, her tea forgotten, muttered, She's pushing it. The German professor. His lecture paused, shook his head. The journalist wrote, French tourist escalates. Gord remains stoic. Sophie, emboldened by the lack of response, stepped closer, her high heels clicking on the marble, stopping just before the white line that marked the god's sacred space. The crowd hushed. Sensing a shift, she leaned in, her yellow dress swaying, her phone capturing every second. What's it like, standing there like a doll? She asked, her voice loud, her Parisian accent sharp. Don't you get bored? A few tourists laughed, but most turned away, their faces flushed with second-hand embarrassment. The Cardiff nurse, her husband's hand tightening, whispered, She's got no respect. The Manchester boy, his pigeon-chasing post, stared, wide-eyed. Thomas's face remained a mask, his eyes fixed, his breathing steady, but his mind registered every word, every glance, every ripple in the courtyard's harmony. Then Sophie crossed the line, literally and figuratively. She stepped over the white boundary, her heels defying the unspoken rule that separated the god from the world. The crowd gasped, aloha rippling outward. The Manchester father, his thermos lowered, said, She can't do that. The German students, their sketches forgotten, filmed with trembling hands. The journalist, her coffee spilling, wrote, Tourist breeches line tension spikes. Sophie, her confidence a shield, reached out, her manicured fingers brushing Thomas's scarlet tunic. A bold, disrespectful gesture. Nice costume, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Bet it's hot under there. The Cardiff nurse, her voice rising, called out, Leave him be. The crowd's murmur grew, a mix of shock and disapproval. Sophie, sensing the attention, but misreading it as encouragement, went further. She raised her hand, her phone still recording, and delivered a light, insolent tap to Thomas's shoulder. The crowd's gasp sharpened, but she wasn't done. With a theatrical flourish, she brought her hand to his cheek, a gentle but brazen slap, the sound sharp against the marble. The courtyard froze, time itself seeming to pause. The Manchester mother clutched her son, whispering, That's not right. The German professor, his glasses slipping, muttered, Unbelievable. The Cardiff husband, his face red, shouted, How dare she? The journalist, her pen racing, wrote, Physical violation, guard's response imminent. Sophie, her laugh faltering, stepped back, expecting a reaction, anger, embarrassment, anything. But Thomas was stone, his face unmoved, his eyes unblinking, his discipline a wall against her provocation. Inside, Thomas's heart pounded, his training warring with his instincts. He thought of his great-uncle, who had stormed Juno Beach with a smile, of his parents, who had taught him the value of quiet strength. He thought of the oath he had sworn to protect the palace, to uphold its dignity, to be more than a man, but a symbol. Sophie's tap, her slap, was not just an insult to him, but to every guard who had stood before, to every soldier who had served. The crowd's eyes, their gasps, their anger, they were his allies. Their respect, his shield. He could not let this pass, not for his pride, but for the tradition he carried. His mind settled, his resolve still. With a movement as precise as a metronome, Thomas stepped forward, one step, his polished boot striking the marble with a crack that echoed off the palace walls. The crowd erupted, a roar of shock and awe. The Manchester boy clapped, his voice high. He moved. The German students, their phones raised, cheered in unison. The Cardiff nurse, tears in her eyes, whispered, Good lad. Thomas's voice, when he spoke, was a thunderclap, deep and commanding, its Devon burr softened by years of service. Thưa bà, he said, his eyes locking onto Sophie's. Bà đã vi phạm ranh giới. Hãy lùi lại ngay lập tức. The Vietnamese phrase, a nod to his regiment's global deployments, added a layer of authority, a reminder of his world beyond the palace. Sophie froze, her phone slipping in her hand, her lips parting in disbelief. The crowd's roar grew, a wave of applause and cheers. The Manchester father, his thermos raised, shouted, "That's the spirit." The German professor, his lecture forgotten, clapped, his students joining in. The journalist, her story shifting from fluff to front page, wrote, "Guards command, a masterclass in authority." Sophie's eyes darted, her confidence crumbling under the weight of Thomas's gaze. The crowd's judgment, the palace's majesty. She stepped back, her heels stumbling, her voice a weak stammer. I was just joking. No one answered. Their silence louder than words. The tension broke as a security officer, a tall man in a black vest named Mr. Patel, stepped forward, his presence calm but unyielding. He nodded to Thomas, a silent acknowledgement, then turned to Sophie, his hand gesturing toward the exit. "Madame, you need to leave," he said, his voice polite but firm. The crowd watched, their phones still raised, as Sophie, her yellow dress now a mark of shame, tried to protest. "It was just a bit of fun," she said, her accent sharp with desperation. Patel's face was stone, his gesture unwavering. The Manchester mother, her son at her side, whispered, "Fun, she's got no shame." The Cardiff nurse, her husband nodding, said, "She's learning now." Sophie, her head lowered, followed Patel, her heels clicking softer now, the crowd parting like a sea. As she reached the gates, a thunderous applause erupted. A salute to Thomas, to tradition, to justice. Thomas resumed his post, his boots striking the marble, his bearskin hat steady. The crowd's cheers faded, their chatter resuming, but their eyes held a new respect, their whispers of the guard who spoke a quiet legend. The Manchester family, packing their picnic, vowed to tell their mates back home. The German students, their sketches complete, posted videos, captioning, "Respect the guard." The Cardiff nurse, her husband's arm around her, said, "That's what makes Britain great." The journalist, her story filed, knew it would dominate tomorrow's headlines. Tourists taunt, met with guards' dignity. The next morning, Sophie returned, her yellow dress replaced by a muted gray coat, her phone absent, her demeanor subdued. She stood at the palace's auxiliary gate, her eyes scanning the courtyard where Thomas stood. Unchanged, unyielding, she approached Mr. Patel, her voice low, her French accent softened by sincerity. "I'm sorry," she said, her hands clasped. "I was wrong. Can you tell him?" Patel, his face softening, nodded. "I'll pass it on, madame." Sophie turned, blending into the crowd, her head bowed, her lesson learned. Back in Paris, she would delete her video, post a quiet apology to her followers, and rethink the way she moved through the world. The crowd, unaware of her return, continued their day. But Patel's message reached Thomas, a quiet nod in the barracks, a reminder that even the brash could change. As noon approached, the courtyard glowed under a strengthening sun, the flags fluttering higher, the marble warm underfoot. A young father, his son perched on his shoulders, approached Thomas, their faces bright with gratitude. The boy, no older than 5, clutched a toy soldier, his eyes wide. "Thank you for your service, sir," the father said, his voice steady, his Birmingham accent warm. Thomas, his posture unbroken, gave a slight nod, the smallest gesture allowed, but his eyes softened, a silent acknowledgement. The boy waved his toy, whispering, "You're my hero." The crowd, watching, began to clap, a slow, steady rhythm that grew into a roar. The Manchester family joined in, their thermos raised. The German professor, his students clapping, smiled. "This is history." The Cardiff nurse, tears streaming, said, "God bless him." The applause echoed off the palace walls, a hymn to tradition, to discipline, to the quiet courage of a man who had stood firm. Thomas, his heart full, remained still, his eyes fixed, his duty unchanged. He thought of his great-uncle, whose stories had guided him, of his parents, who would hear of this moment with pride. He thought of the palace, its stones steeped in centuries of service, and of Sophie, whose apology, however small, was a victory for respect. The crowd dispersed, their day enriched, their phones filled with a story that would travel the world. Tokyo, New York, Sydney, each share a testament to the God who had upheld dignity with a single step. The story spread, carried by videos, articles, and whispered tales. The Times headline, Royal Guards stand, silences. Provocateur sparked debates on respect, tradition, and the power of restraint. Schools taught the story, veterans shared it over pints, and families across Britain watched the video, their hearts swelling with pride. Sophie, back in Paris, began volunteering at the Veterans Center. Her perspective shifted by a moment she'd never forget. Thomas, in the barracks, polished his boots, the ritual grounding him. His mates teased. Famous now. Read. But he smiled. His focus on the next shift. The next chance to serve. In the shadow of Buckingham Palace, where history and humanity meet. One moment had changed everything. It had humbled a provocateur, elevated a guard, and reminded a watching world that tradition is not a relic, but a living force upheld by those who stand, unmoved, for what is right. Corporal Thomas Reed, his step a spark, his voice a beacon, had shown that respect is not demanded, but earned through discipline, dignity, and the courage to act when it matters most. Some moments fade, lost to time's gentle tide. But this one, born of a spring morning, and a steadfast heart, would shine forever, a lesson in the power of honor to transform, to unite, to endure.